So not only does BC get a veto on the memorandum of understanding between Alberta and the feds on a potential pipeline project, but I guess the First Nations chiefs also think they get one. This is from our friends over at Juno News. They've unanimously rejected the Alberta pipeline memorandum of understanding in a resolution just passed hours before Prime Minister Mark Carney addresses the Assembly of First Nations. It was an emergency motion. It wasn't part of their original draft resolutions. And so it was moved by Haida Chief Donald Edgars and seconded by Indigenous resource lawyer Merle Alexander. Printed, distributed, and amended and adopted by full consensus at Tuesday's meeting to, I guess, landlock our oil and gas. And this was something Mark Carney has repeatedly said. Oh, this MOU, it's cute and adorable and all, but it doesn't go forward without the consent of the First Nations or British Columbia. So it is really not worth the paper it's written on. Cory, I'll go to you and then I'll go to Chris.
Sure. I mean, it's a joke. It's as simple as
Yeah.
that. There's the spot right off the bat. If Carney is serious about this, he has to invest political capital and point out the constitutional realities, his constitutional supposed obligations. The First Nations have no veto power in the Constitution, nor does the province of BC. And if he won't say it, I've just recently written a column. We'll see if it gets past the editor that way, but we're saying Daniel Smith may as well use the piece of paper as toilet paper because that's all it's worth now. If he won't say those two things, it's pointless because it's obviously never going to happen and he doesn't want it to happen. So that's exposed it. So the question is Daniel Smith really that naive and being taken for a ride with this? Or is she just setting it up knowing it's going to fail so she can move on to the next phase? Because clearly, and I'm sure you'll get on to that, the membership of the United Conservative Party doesn't feel for a second that agreement is a win for Alberta.
Yeah, the it's not just that Carney won't put BC and the First Nations chiefs in their place. He's actually saying the opposite. While Daniel Smith was holding the press conference on the MOU, the press release out of the Prime Minister's office quite literally said this doesn't happen without the consent of British Columbia or First Nations. Chris, I'll go to you.
Yeah, well, I agree with Cory. Just the idea that a group can unilaterally, without even having a discussion, say no, and the answer will always be no. That kind of lets the cat out of the bag right there. They're not interested in prosperity or working together or even elevating their own people out of the situation they're in. It's a they're exercising their authority as a political weapon and nothing else. And so when I saw this MOU and the premier talking about we're going to get these things done, that was the first thing I thought. We just had the premier of BC say it's never going to happen. We have the Indigenous group saying it's never going to happen, and Carney knows this. The Liberals know this. I mean, there's like 350 open actions against the federal government by Indigenous groups right now, and there's no way that he knew. There's no way he didn't know that this was going to be shut down by them in this way, or a try to be shut down.
Lise.
No, the one red flag that I immediately noticed when they announced this deal between the feds and Alberta was that it was Indigenous led. Indigenous led. So we went from Indigenous consultation to Indigenous led in absolutely no time. And if you can show me in the Indigenous Ways of Knowing manual how you know how to manage a multi-billion-dollar project that is responsible for the biggest economic driver in the province, well, then I'm all for it. But the truth of the matter is we need serious people working on these things, these kinds of projects, this projects of this scope, and we need to make sure that they're on board. Indigenous led, and then all of a sudden these Indigenous chiefs come out and say we want nothing to do with it. Okay, well, this is a nothing burger. This project is a nothing burger.
Well, and just to back up a little, Northern Gateway was an Indigenous-led pipeline.
Mhm.
Our Indigenous bands in Alberta are deeply involved in the oil and gas sector because it gives well-paying jobs in their own communities. They don't have to go to
Mhm.
Edmonton. They can stay in their own communities. We've got Indigenous bands that are deeply involved in the oil and gas sector. There's the Mikisew, Cold Lake, Fort McKay, all the bands around Fort McMurray, most of them have deep involvement in the oil and gas sector. But being Indigenous led does not make or break a pipeline these days. It's the or lack of ability, or actually, I think they have the ability, lack of political will of the federal government to enforce the Constitution around here, because Northern Gateway was an Indigenous led project that was allowed to just languish and die because of the tanker ban.
Well, but when they use language like this is the same as
Oh, yeah.
land acknowledgements. When they use language like Indigenous led, what the Indigenous people of BC hear is, well, we get to say no then. We get
Right.
to say no. We are leading ourselves right into a no. And so this is the danger of politicizing projects like this, like the federal government is wanting to do.
Canadians know the national anthem. They stand in silence to remember those who died for this country. But not every Canadian knows their rights and freedoms. The Freedom Passport will change that. It looks and feels like a Canadian passport, but contains the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in a portable, easy-to-read format. The Freedom Passport. Order one for yourself and for all the freedom lovers that you love at freedompassport.ca.
We've got a clip of Mark Carney here. He says he doesn't need to talk to the First Nations to remind them that they don't have a veto because there's no pipeline to talk about, which is sadly true. Let's watch this.
Would we ram through a pipeline? No, never. No, never. We will consult free, prior, informed consent with First Nations. We will work with the province of British Columbia. We have conditions in the MOU with Alberta. We know how to work with the provinces. We know how to consult. We know how to respect. Does the member opposite?
He just renamed Justin Trudeau's immigration minister to cabinet, the guy who destroyed our immigration system and helped double the housing costs in this country. And that minister has now had something to say about this prime minister's failure to consult on pipelines. He said the consultation should have started yesterday. So why is it that he didn't start 8 months ago consulting First Nations? Is it because he doesn't care what they have to say, or because he just doesn't want the pipeline to get built?
Mr. Speaker, I recognize this situation is very, very complicated for the member opposite. First off, you have to have a pipeline project. You have to have a private proponent. In order for that to happen, we had to create the conditions precedent. We have now done that because we talk to the provinces. We work with the provinces. Mr. Speaker, in the Building Canada Act, which was passed before the member opposite returned to this House, we set out the consultation process for nation-building projects.
Okay, I'll go to Chris first, and then I'll go to Cory. Am I crazy? But the MOU, by failing to remind First Nations they don't get a veto, we are never going to get a pipeline company who's going to put forth any sort of capital, sink any costs in this, because we've got a federal government that has said, well, it doesn't matter what sort of technical review the pipeline may pass. It might not, that doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, the First Nations people can just say no. The Prime Minister used the word prior informed consent, but that's not what the law says. The law says consultation.
Yeah, and consultation doesn't mean veto. He's right here, though. There isn't a project to talk about.
Sure.
So there is no, they don't need to consult on anything right now. But he has this habit of letting the cat out of the bag. He's told us all of the hurdles to getting that pipeline built. And those hurdles are not minor things. They're major things. And they've caused us to stumble for decades in this province. So why would it be any different now? But the other thing here is, and something people should be aware of, and they should be asking, who is it in the Indigenous groups that's saying no?
Right.
Is it the people or is it the chiefs? And then you got to ask why. Why are they saying no to this before they even talk about? Why is the answer always no? And I would suggest that there are some people right now who benefit greatly from the inequity that First Nations people experience in this country. These people drive new vehicles, they have huge houses, they have huge pensions, and they get everything they need. If you elevate those people out of poverty and into prosperity, and you give them the tools so that they don't need to rely on someone else to provide for them, all of a sudden, all of these people who benefit from the structure are irrelevant. And it's their futures that are at risk. So they're willing to sacrifice the future of the province and the entire country maintain that control. It's actually it's disgusting.
Yeah, I mean, if I were a pipeline builder, and this is one of the things I asked Premier Smith at the AGM, if I were a pipeline builder and I'm looking at Russia, OPEC, America with their drill baby drill attitude, and no increase in carbon tax there, and none of this giving a veto to these other places, of course I would not consider investing in Canada. I just wouldn't. It's an unsafe place for me to park my money. I'll go to Cory.
Well, yeah, and there are proponents waiting in the wings. Alberta's sitting on one of the largest deposits on the planet. There's an Asian market, hungry and starving, that would be overjoyed to purchase that product if we could just get it to the coast. They know that, but they're not going to invest a red cent until Carney essentially says it right off the bat when he said, I'm not going to force a pipeline through to the coast. Well, then it's done. Because that's the only way it's going to happen, is you are going to have to force it. You're going to have to show some political knackers, take on your job as a prime minister and say it's going to be done. It is your role to consult with respect, bring in involvement. That's fine. But we can't pretend as well that we're starting from scratch with this. Look, the Northern Gateway consulted, studied, did everything up and down. You know what? The mountains are in the same place. The dirt's in the same place. The creeks are in the same place. We just need to knock the dust off that, change some dates, and it's done. They could speed this through quickly if they had the will. And what we're seeing right now is he doesn't have the will. He's being disingenuous. And what he's done is found a backdoor way to increase the industrial carbon tax in Alberta without giving the concession of giving us a pipeline. We've lost on both fronts.
Right. We gave a lot to get potentially nothing in return. And then the Pathways Alliance guys get their magic beans. They're very expensive magic beans. Lise, go ahead.
No, well, I'm just wondering if blazing a blazing a pipeline straight south wouldn't fix all of these things. We could pull a nutrient and send right, pull a nutrient. This is Saskatchewan potash and Saskatchewan uranium went straight to America. Alberta should consider doing the same thing and screw BC. Absolutely screw them. The tankers can wave at BC on their way out of the Washington port. And this is a quick way to solve them and cut them out of the equation. BC, who needs you? Screw you. We're going somewhere else.
Yeah, they don't have a problem with those Alaskan oil tankers coming down to Cherry Point Refinery.
Sure do
at all.
not.
They sure
No.
don't.